I was from Chicago and the South Side, and it took me 90 minutes to get to high school every day. So I've thought a lot about transportation in the past. The South Side is totally inequitable when you look at kind of resource given to the north side of the city. So did a lot of thinking about what makes places great.
Did you know the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime? What if you could use those hours to find fulfillment and become a disruptor for good? Welcome to the Work That's Worth It podcast. I'm Georgie Enthoven, and I'm here to demonstrate that an ambitious, meaningful, and rewarding career is not just a dream, it's achievable. Each episode will dive into conversations with global change makers who cracked the code on combining income and impact. If you've ever felt like you were torn between a paycheck and your purpose, or maybe you simply yearn for more purpose, you're going to be exposed to the ambitious humans who have done it themselves. Ready to make your work worth it? Let's get started. One of the things I love most about hosting this podcast is the opportunity to speak with such a diverse array of guests who've all found their own unique ways to make meaningful contributions through their careers. A few of my guests have chosen career paths where the rewards are primarily non-monetary, finding fulfillment through their impact. However, by design, most have demonstrated that with intention and strategy, it's entirely possible to create a positive impact while building financial stability or even success. I have deliberately sought out these types of stories for you because I want you to know it's achievable. Today's guest, Laura Fox, has masterfully crafted a career where purpose and prosperity reinforce each other rather than compete. She is the co-founder and managing partner of Streetlife Ventures, a seed-stage venture fund investing in urban climate solutions that transform sectors including mobility, buildings, energy, waste, and water. What makes her story particularly compelling is that this balance wasn't handed to her on a silver platter. It's something that she has thoughtfully and deliberately built throughout her career journey. Laura has an impressive track record of turning urban challenges into scalable solutions. Before launching Streetlife Ventures, she was the GM of Citi Bike at Lyft, where she transformed it into a $100 million annual revenue business and one of the country's largest transportation systems. Her experience spans from leading diligence on urban climate tech companies at Sidewalk Labs to launching new mobility products with Boston Consulting Group's Digital Ventures team, and advising Bloomberg Philanthropies on their urban investment strategy. Beyond her operational investment work, Laura shares her expertise teaching MBA strategy courses at NYU Stern. And there's something that doesn't surprise me at all. Laura's friends call her 20 questions, since she loves getting to the heart of a good idea, so much so that she's even given a TED Talk on the topic. I can't wait to dive into Laura's journey from the south side of Chicago to becoming a leader in urban climate solutions, and to explore how her curiosity has shaped her approach to building a career that truly balances personal success with meaningful impact. Hi, Laura. I'm so excited to have you on the Work That's Worth It podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
So special to have you and to explore all the different kinds of work that you have done, which so much of it has been work that's worth it for you and worthwhile. And I was wondering if we could just start, if you can share a little about your journey and how you've managed to combine financial success with meaningful impact.
Yeah, of course. And for context, where my path has taken me today is I'm the co-founder and managing partner of a venture capital fund that focuses on the intersection of cities and climate. So we focus on very early stage companies that have a B2B go-to-market across 5 main sectors: mobility, logistics, buildings, energy, waste and water, and adaptation. So focusing on both the mitigation and adaptation sides of climate within dense cities. And when I look back, probably would have been able to predict that cities were somehow involved, but never would have predicted that I would be running a venture capital fund. I wouldn't have known what that was.
Yeah.
Would have thought that I was crazy. And so the early part of my journey, I graduated from undergrad and happy to talk even in the future about like what the decision was even to where to have my first job. But I had a day job after doing a lot of different things in undergrad that was at Morningstar, was learning a lot of product management, kind of growth marketing and great skill sets like that. But outside of work, I was reading a lot about what makes cities great, I was from Chicago and the South Side, and it took me 90 minutes to get to high school every day. So I've thought a lot about transportation in the past. The South Side is totally inequitable when you look at kind of resource given to the North side of the city. So did a lot of thinking about what make places great. And I started to get really interested in the role of arts and culture in creating great places that connected people and community. And that took me when I was 24 to move to Qatar in the Middle East to work for their museums after doing some writing and policy pieces in Chicago outside of my day job for local publications and things like that. And, when you move to an entirely new country, one, you're taking a big step forward. I didn't grow up traveling at all as a kid and, had done traveling abroad for the first time in undergrad, traveled a bit after that, but had never been to the Middle East, never been to the country I was moving towards. So there was an incredible amount of great learning for me there, both professionally. I was managing a team of 10 people when I was 24 to lead digital strategy for those museums and thinking about both interactivity within the museums, placemaking within the city. But as a person, I was walking around Doha, the capital city of Qatar where I was living, and was noticing that there weren't sidewalks and there wasn't public transportation at the time, no affordable housing. Most of our water was from desalination plants. There was extreme heat. And so I just started to have a transformational moment in my career where I was like, I got to get back to the things that kind of brought me to my passion for cities, which is focusing on these built environment topics like mobility, buildings, sustainability, and all of this core stuff. I call it like moving down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So went to Bangladesh for a bit after that to work on an urban strategy there. Then I went to NYU for business school because they had an urbanization project embedded in the business school, which was an incredible experience that I could talk an entire podcast episode about, but essentially got to do live projects with cities, real estate firms, and others to kind of deploy that MBA toolkit live while I was there, which was great. And then I went to the Boston Consulting Group to work for their Digital Ventures group, again, focused on building startups for corporates and within the built environment. So a lot of stuff in real estate, a lot of stuff in mobility. Then went to Sidewalk Labs, a subsidiary of Google, focus on future of cities. I think you're hearing a theme. And then went and ran Citi Bike at Lyft for 4 years as their general manager, ran the P&L, and grew that from, a 30 million revenue business to over 120 million revenue business, turned around the business, like really fun and exciting. But I think one of the things you probably hear in my journey, after Citi Bike started the fund, here in my journey is that there is no straight path for me. One of my very good friends from my time at Sidewalk Labs oftentimes calls my story versus her story a particular kind of language and framework. She jokes that her story is the straight path through the forest and that she's done progressive roles in real estate, right after undergrad, real estate investment banking, went to business school for real estate, now has done a ton of asset management within real estate, was working on real estate when we worked together. And then, my story is like the forest that surrounds the path, I guess, which I'm complimented by as a metaphor, and that I'm really curious in how this interest in places and cities evidences itself and where I can be best positioned to drive financial value and impact throughout that.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. And there's so many opportunities that you have had that each one alone would be a fantastic podcast. And I am thinking about one of the chapters that I have in my book is on contribution. And on contribution, it's sort of what is the thread that you can pull through all different aspects of your career that you can make sense of. So it can either be one word like transportation or environment and transportation or urban planning. And I noticed that for you, it all made sense. Even if somebody else, it felt like it was sort of around the forest or like in and out of the forest. But for you, each step was fulfilling a curiosity or a part of your adventure to getting closer to your contribution.
Yeah, I'm a very curious person just by nature, which you can, as you said, you can see in my path. And I would feel very bored and constrained to be on the straight line because I'd be like, what is this for? Right. And just getting to that like next run of promotion and things like that has never been my big motivator, although I've had a lot of successes in my careers. It's all been about what is this big, exciting idea that like I can participate in early in my career, I can lead at this point in my career, right? And really be pushing forward in a unique way. And I love constantly learning. And I love the idea that 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to predict where I am today. And 10 years in the future, I won't be able to predict that either.
Yeah.
Maybe one anecdote on this, because I know many of your listeners are in college, just out of college. I had a major career crisis, I would say, when I was 22 or 23. LinkedIn had just come out at the time, and I probably messaged 50 people who were early on LinkedIn and asked for a 15-minute coffee in Chicago. And I remember one of the handful of people who was so thoughtful and kind enough to respond to that was a woman who ran the Chicago Community Trust at the time. And when we showed up for coffee, I'm 23. This is like someone who would basically occupy hero status to me at that time. And I think the first question after like issuing a hurried hello that I gave to her was something like, how have you figured it all out? And how do I do that? Yeah, small question. And she burst out laughing, which like I completely agree with at this point in my career, right? That life and careers are a journey of figuring it out continuously, right? If you maintain that curiosity and maintain this North Star of where you're going, but aren't adherent to a specific path.
Yeah. And before this interview, I listened to your TED Talk, and you were very inspired by your grandmother. And
so inspired.
I would love you to share that story. I related so much to it because one of the things that I have found that I've really stepped into, and it gives me such a sense of freedom, is to be a beginner. And I related to your TED Talk very much. Yeah, please share a little bit of the highlights of your talk and your relationship with your grandmother and what she set in motion for you.
Yeah. Yeah, my relationship with my grandmother was so special. She and my great aunt essentially raised my twin brother and I. So we had a day-to-day relationship with them that was so warm and touching. And my grandmother, grew up in a generation of women who didn't have a lot of opportunities. And so she kind of finished high school. Maybe you could say that she did, really didn't, but was a voracious reader, like read 2 newspapers a day, was constantly reading novels, like watching the news. So it was like constantly taking in information and really engage, at this big level, but also at this just like appreciation of the day to day that I think is so easy to let go and let go of delight. And so the thing I talk about in the TED Talk that has always stuck with me is, after the rain in Chicago, be like immediately after, she'd be like, put on your shoes or we're going to miss them. Like these worms that would crawl out and be on the sidewalk. And just watching them, right, as little children, like you gain this appreciation, not only for this big picture, but also for kind of noticing the small details and kind of existing in the present, which I think as an adult, I appreciate even more that she was like that, right? Because it's so easy to get wrapped up in kind of existential, what's next, only thinking about the future, never being kind of present or satisfied in the present. And I think that she was emblematic of that. And I think she, without having that formal education, which we can, so many circles really prioritize, like where people went to school, what kinds of degrees they got. She asked questions. She was constantly eager and open to learn. She never felt like saying she didn't know was a bad thing for her. It was an opportunity for like an adventure and that beginner mindset that you mentioned. And so I think that that's something I've really taken with me across my career. And I mentioned I was a golf caddy in that TED Talk, which like really you put to work those skill sets because you have nothing in common with these men who are 40, 50 years older than yourself.
I actually love that piece because you mentioned something about what you thought the job was and what it actually was is really different. And I think that is relevant for any job that you have. But why don't you share a little bit about what you thought it would be and what it ended up having to be?
Yeah. So I was a golf caddy for 7 summers as a kid. I'm sure a lot of people listening had summer jobs of different kinds. I started when I was 12 until I was 19 or so in the summers. And, I'd heard about it from someone I went to grade school with. And I basically thought the job was like carrying around a golf bag for someone who was golfing, right? Or running alongside of a car was like basically the premise. I played basketball and volleyball and baseball and soccer and swimming and like all these sports. I knew very little about golf. But when I showed up, I realized that the relationship that I had with the golfer was actually fundamentally different. Like, yes, I was carrying their clubs, but I was also meant to be this companion over the course of a 9 holes, 18 holes. And I think as someone who at that point in life had very little life experience, that felt very intimidating to me. The people I was caddying for, I come from very little money. They had lots of money. They were in very fancy roles. I knew no one that was like a lawyer or a doctor or important in business growing up. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very much like blue collar workers and city workers and things like that. And so I didn't feel like I could be this like entertainer, but what I did feel like I could do was learn from them and this set of life experiences that I thought could be really interesting. And so I learned, I think, from my grandmother to start like the foundation of that. But as a caddy, the like, entryway to learning something completely different than you thought that you would on any single day by starting a conversation with questions and learning from someone who you think at first is completely different than you, but might actually be different, but bring forward incredible stories and life experiences.
Yeah, what a great way to frame that. And I noticed in your career, you've tried all sorts of different types of organizations and different from very corporate to probably what you're doing right now, which is pretty entrepreneurial. Yeah. And I wonder also this mindset of curiosity and openness has allowed you to hop from these very different environments and succeed in all of them.
Yeah. I generally tend to be excited by a challenge. This is something I talk to friends about often, and that, when you do something that is related, but not the exact thing, like, so for example, my immediate role before this, general manager of Citi Bike, I was managing a team of 1,000. Easy next step for me would have been COO, right, of another organization that had a technology product, had an interesting operational profile. I still think that would be a really interesting role, but I was interested in doing something different. And as part of those transitions, like you put yourself in a position where there's a lot of new stuff you have to learn, right? Yeah. I'd been an angel investor, but being a more institutional investor, taking the skills that I had from being a P&L owner to supporting kind of startups and scaling the advisory work that I've been doing before. There's just lots of things to be curious and interested in. And so I think having the mindset of being excited, right, and curious, rather than allowing ourselves to fall into negative emotion patterns like overwhelm, frustration, fear, right, can be such a big differential between the type of experience that you have as a result. And so it's something I talk to people about a lot. It's like, can you put yourself in the curiosity seat rather than the fear seat?
Yeah. And it seems like without a challenge, you might lose motivation. Like you are really drawn to something that is challenging. And this is something I hear a lot from people who find work that's worth it. It's the scope of the challenge that's sometimes so invigorating for people who are intelligent and ambitious like yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I have wondered at times, like,
could you take the easy
having
road?
A step where I coast a little bit more would probably be a good idea, but every part of me enjoys the challenge. So I think I'm just that kind of person, and it's okay to accept that.
You're accepting it. Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can tell us more about, so you took this pivot to setting up your own VC fund, what that's actually like, when in your career you can do something like this, and maybe a little bit about the types of companies that you invest in.
Yeah, completely. So I think maybe I'll start with the like when in your life it makes sense to set up a VC fund, and then what it's like in types of companies. Like to set up, there's this, running phrase that like being in venture in general is the slowest way to get rich. And I think so often when I talk to people, they think that being in venture, it's like you're making a ton of money in the day to day, right? And like it's very immediate. And that's the opposite. This is kind of a 10-year game. And as part of setting up a firm related to that, right, like you go without a salary for a period of time when you're starting the fund and doing your own fundraise to bring in money, right, before you gain capital to start paying yourself, deploying into companies and things like that. And so I really advise people that doing something like starting a VC fund, I think is best for when you're later in your career, you have enough financial buffer that going without a salary for a period of time is okay with you, making less than you could in a kind of other type of employment is okay with you, right? Because you're excited about the content, you're excited about kind of the long-term financial and impact outcomes of the fund. And so I would say that. And then second piece I would really emphasize is that I don't think I could do what I do now if I didn't have the set of life experiences that I had previously. Founders want to work with us because we bring really pragmatic experience to them, right? And so we really focus on post-investment support. And that can be everything from like help on regulations, help on operations, business model, connecting them to customers that we've known across our careers, right? And deep relationships, helping them understand how to like build the financial capital stack of their business, which is actually pretty challenging because you need to combine equity, debt, other products, especially if you're a hardware company. And oftentimes that expertise comes across even in a first conversation because we'll send questions in advance And at the end of a first call, like I can't tell you how often it is that founders are like, wow, this was like a really enjoyable call. Like we got into like a level of detail that is really rare for me. And so I think that without the experiences that we had, not only would it be harder to diligence a company, but it would be really hard to get them excited about us and accept our money, add value to them in the way that we want to add value, and have the perspective of what we've seen work versus not work over time.
Yeah. So it's well beyond a transaction. You need a connection and you need to be able to be of value to them beyond your financial investment.
Yeah. And I think just like one extra point there too is I often talk to folks who are in undergrad who are just thinking about first step in their career and they want to start their career in venture. And I would just really advise, one, I think working at an early stage startup would actually be far better experience to start because you're working in a growing company, you're seeing what's working, what's not working, you're gaining a really specific skill set. So whether you go into like a business development role, kind of a growth marketing role, operations role, whatever, right? Like all of a sudden you bring a great lens and opportunity to start and can be more helpful to the founder after the investment profile too.
Yeah. And tell us about some of the companies that you have invested in and even how you evaluate what you are going to invest in.
Yeah. I mean, that's the really fun part about venture, right? And running a firm has like fun and less fun parts, which we could talk about in the future. But the thing that like gets me up excited every day, right, is getting to invest in companies that are creating this incredible impact while also building like a really successful and awesome business. And so some examples of companies in our portfolio, one I would call out is Ryzm. They are a company that sits at the intersection of our energy and adaptation verticals. I think folks may know this who are listening to the podcast, but the rise of natural disasters driven by climate-related weather changes has grown about 500% in the last 10 years. And that's starting to really impact government, cities, but is increasingly impacting all sorts of infrastructure providers, corporates, and things like that. One of the sectors that's been hardest hit is one of the largest infrastructure providers, which are utilities. The US has the largest number of power outages on a per capita basis of any developed country globally. Super embarrassing.
Wow.
Right, our infrastructure is old, it's decaying. We're spending $60 billion just to replace stuff from the climate disaster side of the house. And the forward-looking ability to do that ongoing is really constrained. And so across the country, we're seeing rolling power outages that feel more similar to like times when I lived in Bangladesh, right? Which is crazy. And so Ryzm maps out climate risks as it exists today, projects in the future, and then maps infrastructure assets onto that. And then on the back end shows really clear cost benefit scenarios of, based on the type of natural disaster and climate risk, what would be the cost of upgrading that infrastructure? It could be above ground or below ground, fortified substations, whatever that might be. And then what's, the weighted likely cost of that natural disaster actually occurring. So you're able to do really clear cost benefit analysis. They were the first company we're ever invested in. And so you can't have a favorite, but like in this game, I don't think, but just have been really excited to follow their journey. They just had a great follow-on round. And then maybe one of our most recent investments is in a company called Public Grid. And Public Grid essentially targets a really big problem, which probably a lot of the folks listening to this are renters. Renters on average pay 10 to 15% more on their utility bills than owners because they're not able to do upgrades to a home like new windows, insulation, all the kind of stuff that can reduce that kind of energy loss. And so what Public Grid does is it delivers brokered energy, community solar, and then what's called virtual power plant solutions to reduce the cost of energy to renters by upwards of 20%. And it does it through move-in agencies and a whole host of others. So we love those types of solutions that just make sense from a cost perspective, right? And also are green.
Yeah. And I think part of what I write about in my book is understanding what is the problem that I am solving and is that worth my valuable time? And we talked about your grandma earlier, but how could you explain to your grandma that the problem that you're solving and why it is worth the time that you're investing in it? And I love these examples because it's really clear what the problem is and what the solution is, and that there's a financial model that the more you grow, the more you're helping solve this problem. So that is such a wonderful factor for success.
Yeah. And just like super quick anecdote there, I think to completely agree with and build on your point, knowing really what that pain point is so important. Like, what is the actual problem? What is the pain point that your customer is facing? Just an example from my time at Citi Bike, when you look at riding a bike as part of a transportation, like set of options, right? Like transportation, largest source of emissions in the US, second largest within cities. And riding a bike after walking is the best thing you can do for the environment, right? When you think about dropping that emissions profile. But that is not the reason at all why anyone rides a bike, right? Like maybe a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. And so, when I first started Citi Bike, we were kind of redoing all of our growth marketing and really thinking about how to get people excited about the product, become regular users, and asked a series of focus groups and quantitative surveys, others. And really, like, interest in the environment was important to people, but it was like number 15, right? They're like, it makes me feel good, right? To know that that's an extra benefit. But the actual pain points were things like, it's difficult for me to get there otherwise, so taking a bike saves me time. Other modes of transportation are expensive, so it gets me there cheaper. Mental health, I get to be outside. Physical health, I'm moving, right? Like those kinds of things that are really foundational to how someone acts. And so I would really encourage people as they're thinking about, if they're thinking about a company or an idea, like really ground yourself in that. Who is the customer and what is the real problem that they have, rather than finding something fun and trying to superimpose it onto a person or a company.
Yeah. So being open to listening and not imposing what your value system and why you've come to the company on your customers, because that may be sort of the larger impact that the company is focused on, but it's not necessarily what draws in the user.
I completely agree. And one of my biggest turnoffs as an investor is when, a founder is talking about their customers if they're really dumb and they're a big and successful company. And it's like, okay, there's probably a reason that they're doing that. Like, why? And like, maybe this whole conversation will come back to like curiosity and asking questions, to your point, but love to like have that nuanced understanding of what's really happening.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were to think about that time at Citi Bikes, what are the skills and learning that you got there that would be important for somebody, like if they wanted to work in an environment where they're attached to a company having a meaningful contribution, but they're not at a stage where they can run a company or start a venture capital fund? Like, what kind of work does something like Citi Bikes involve?
Yeah, totally. So I would say I learned a ton. I had been building towards that type of role for a long time over the course of my career, both in terms of even starting my career in like product and growth marketing related stuff, then the strategy and financial skill set from both business school and consulting and building products. But the big risk that, my boss who hired me at the time, took on me was that I'd never managed a major operation before, right? And so like there is a big physical side of what Citi Bike does and an important piece of that. And so had that belief statement with me, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. It was really fun. We grew Citi Bike to be the like 20th largest transportation service in the entire United States, which is cool. So for all the naysayers who say that no one's ever going to ride a bike, why don't you move to Amsterdam? Is something I have actually heard. It was really fun to prove out that active transportation can be a real mode shift and a real way that people get around. So learn tons of things. I think as a P&L owner, you're doing marketing, you're managing all of what's called the top line. So like revenue growth. Revenue growth includes like managing marketing, sponsorships, in our cases, a relationship with the city, which kind of ties into public-private policy and partnerships, which is also part of the team. Then you have kind of a very strategic part of the role, and then an operational part of the role, a product and engineering side of the role. Like it kind of goes on and on. And so the types of roles that would be available for people who might be interested in that kind of business kind of range similarly, right? So things like growth marketing, really critical, really important to growing a business, really knowing what stage in a funnel to focus efforts, how to best target people, how to get them excited about the product that you're using. For folks who are more interested in like the public-private side of the thing, side of the house, policy roles are really critical in organizations like that. We didn't sell to government, but we had a public-private partnership with the government, which meant that we were in constant conversation. There were like many great things that came out of that relationship, but it needed to be constantly attended to, right, and looked after in addition to the broader landscape that we were dealing with. Third big area, you'd say like strategy, business development type roles. In most companies, there isn't a pure play strategy role unless they're really big. And so in most operational organizations, you have someone who's playing kind of a couple different hats. And so often that can be a business development side of the house. Next area are like operational skill sets. So that can be people who are managing ongoing operations. So like, what are the key metrics? So typically those are folks that are really data oriented. Like, what are the key metrics we're tracking on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis to know that we're delivering a great service at a cost that works for us. And then there's folks who manage the operational side of that is more like the urban planning side, and that there's like a bunch of physical stuff that needs to go into the world.
Must be quite a challenge too. Where the bikes actually need to be at what time.
Yeah. That's called rebalancing. That includes a ton of data scientists. There's an entire kind of product and engineering layer to the house, both software and hardware. And so it's a great example of a business where you could operate in any of those seats and really contribute meaningfully, right, to the outcome of Citi Bike as a company and as a product.
And gain a lot of skills in the meantime.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You have probably interviewed a lot of people, especially in these last roles for jobs. What are you seeing that helps people stand out?
That's a great question. I think for me, I'm looking for a couple different things. One is just like problem solving and insights, right? Like, how good is someone at walking me through, showing me their ability to solve a tough problem? And that can be, how do they break it down? What are the pieces of work that they did related to that? How do they bring other people on board, right? Like that whole package. And I think that that ties pretty closely to what in consulting terms is called an ownership mindset in quotes. But I think of now probably as like agency, right? And kind of self-determination. So someone who's able to kind of run through that process thoroughly, likes to be a leader themselves, right? And push that forward. Other critical things can be things like just communication. So how are they describing the work, communicating what they've done, how it's being done, what that looks like, and the cadence that they're creating around that. Yeah, those are some of the big ones. And then it comes down to like a lot of hard skills, right? So outside of the personality side of it, right? Depending on the type of role, right? If it's a marketing role, how good is someone at breaking down a channel strategy, knowing exactly which tools to execute, how to manage cost, right? And bring someone through effectively. If it's a more operational role, it's incredibly quantitative, right? And so how good is someone at creating KPIs, identifying which ones are the biggest drivers, making sure that those go well, because then they're taking all those numbers and then like managing people and physical operations to like make change happen. And so there's both like a highly analytical and then like a project management skill to that. Data scientists write specific like tools that they've done. And so I would say like, I don't want to go through like every single product, but I would say like it's a bit of that like like core kind of personality side of the house and kind of broader skill set, and then hyper specific skill sets based on the role too.
Yeah. Can we quickly touch on business school? You made the decision to go and you shared a little bit about the program and why that was such a good fit for you. But what would you have people think about when considering getting an MBA?
Yeah. And I've taught back at Stern now the last 6 years too, in different classes, usually just like one class a semester or so. But I get this question asked a lot because business school is expensive, right? And it's a time away from doing the next step in your career. And so for me, it made a lot of sense because I wanted to do a pivot, right? And so, it's going from having a growth marketing kind of product-y background. I had recognized that I felt like I was at the end of the decision-making chain and I wanted to be the front of the decision-making chain. And in order to do that, I realized I needed to have much better financial and strategic skill sets. And so to me, business school would make a big pivot there. And to my transformational moment, right, of like going down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I realized that in order to work on the things I really wanted to in urban issues, that it needed to be things that had a lot more kind of hard skills, kind of industry knowledge and things like that, which is why Stern's urbanization project was such a great way to kind of experiment and prototype that interest. So it made a lot of sense for me. I think for folks who are interested in doing that big pivot, I think it makes a lot of sense. Right. And really encourage that as, a door opening in a way and skill sets being kind of amplified very quickly in a way that can make a lot of sense. I think for folks who are really interested in what they're doing now and want to stay in the same industry, maybe just get a promotion in their current job. Like I would say that I don't think that business school is necessary, right? In a lot of ways, like, and you're not looking to change function, right? So I think it's really dependent on the person, right? I think that this is something that I did not realize earlier in my career, but I find to be like fundamentally true now, which is that anyone who gives you advice, like hopefully they caveat it by saying this worked for me in my experience
100%.
and here's why. So
Yes.
often I feel like people declare their own experience on high as like the best option for anyone to have taken. And I disagree with that. So I think if you're in a position where you're happy where you're at, you just want to go to the next position, you're considering business school just because your friends are going, you don't have to do that, right? There are some industries where maybe there's like a ceiling unless you do something like business school or an advanced degree. And I think you can kind of ask around, talk to people more senior to understand if that's really the case. And if this is the path you really want to go down, then maybe it does make sense. But, it's not for everyone and it doesn't need to be for everyone.
Yeah. I have a deep question that I am wondering if you could share is you've really lived the American dream from where you started being raised by your grandmother and great aunt and on the south side of Chicago looking for worms in the rain. And you've been able to achieve so much with your career, like financial success, impact success. And what would you attribute that to? That you've taken a huge leap?
Yeah. That's such a great question. I don't know. I love the question. I think for me, I'll say I don't know.
Okay.
But if I were to,
don't know yet.
yet. I don't know yet. If I were to pull at the threads, I would say like I've always just been interested in like the big idea and like embracing this bigness of life experience, right? And so one small example, I grew up with a twin brother, and when we were looking at high schools, the high schools near us were like all boys, all girls. And, I went and shadowed him at the all boys school. Then we went to like the all girls school for like these open houses. And the all boys school had like 3 times the number of AP classes and like labs and cool opportunities. And we went to the all girls school and we were just like, wait a second. They have a basketball team. Like I was a basketball player. That's nice. But like, like the math classes aren't very good. There's like no prep.
Where's the maker's lab?
yeah, kind of, right? And so I ended up getting a scholarship. I was like, I can't do this. It has to be fair that like I get the same education as my brother. I think I'm just as smart. And so I got a scholarship to go to a high school downtown that I think was really transformational for me, and that I did take a train 90 minutes door to door, but, I was with kids from all over the city who came from very different backgrounds than me. We joked that there was like the poor train coming from the south side of all of us, but, like learned from the life experiences of like other folks around me. I aspired then to like want to go to like a good university, right, and get a scholarship. But I was like, I'm like a scholarship kid through and through. So it's like, high school, college, business school, but was like, I have to find a way of making this work. Like, I really want to be open to that opportunity. And so, I think that, and I felt very constrained by, the context I grew up in on the South Side. Like my family lived in the same generation for neighborhood, like for generations. Yeah. So maybe I would say like, maybe getting back into curiosity is curiosity about going bigger, expanding your horizon, learning more.
Yeah. What's behind the curtain? You were curious. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great question though.
Yeah. Maybe points to ponder.
Yeah.
Well, it's been such a wonderful conversation and I've learned so much from you and feel incredibly inspired. And just thank you for taking time to be on the podcast and sharing your journey with us and how your work is worth it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Georgie. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Thank you for such thoughtful questions and all that you're doing to expose younger folks to these different career paths, because it's the number one thing when I look back on that I wish that I had. And I like love that you're doing this work. So thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, we'll keep in touch and thank you really for sharing so much of your journey.
Great. Thanks, Georgie.
Let's wrap up and focus on 2 important points that I wanted to place extra emphasis on. First, embracing curiosity as your career compass. Laura's journey demonstrates how curiosity can transform your career trajectory. She didn't follow a straight path, but instead she pursued what she calls the forest surrounding the path, following her interest in cities, sustainability, and creating impact. What's powerful about Laura's story is that she shows us how taking the scenic route and embracing your natural curiosity can lead to more fulfilling opportunities than a predetermined career ladder. Her life reminds us your starting circumstances don't determine your destination. Your willingness to ask questions, explore new horizons, and step into unfamiliar territory does. Next, I also want to touch on the critical importance of your support system. A piece of advice Laura shared with me after our recording is the profound impact of finding a supportive partner who also has their own interests and ambitions. She's observed this as a make or break factor, particularly in many women's careers. Needing a safety net aligned perfectly with what I discuss in my book, Work That's Worth It, in the chapter on connections, where I introduce the concept of the safety net and the trampoline. Your safety net consists of those closest to you who provide emotional support, encouragement, and a soft landing when you fall. A supportive partner forms a crucial part of the safety net as someone you interact with daily. When your partner believes in your potential and your ambitions as much as their own, it creates the psychological safety needed to take risks and pursue challenging opportunities without fear of judgment or having to shoulder everything alone. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Work That's Worth It. Remember, every conversation we share is designed to empower you to build a career that's truly worth your time and energy. There are future disruptors out there just like you who would appreciate the conversations in this podcast. Please support me by spreading the word and sharing this episode with a friend or two, or visit my website at georgieenthoven.com. That's spelled GeorgieEnthoven.com. Until next time, ask yourself, what problems am I solving, and are they worth my valuable time? Your intentional choices today can lead to exponential impact tomorrow. Thanks for listening.